There's no way this is your car. The valet attendant's voice carried across the parking area as he stepped between Marcus Thompson and the sleek McLaren 720S. You need to move away from this vehicle right now. Marcus looked up in confusion, his key fob still in his hand, genuinely bewildered by the accusation. But what the attendant didn't know was that this car thief was a 26-year-old tech billionaire who had just sold his startup for $2.8 billion, and his response was about to make national headlines. The Beverly Hills rodeo collection represented everything that money could buy and status could command. Its marble-clad parking garage housed some of the world's most expensive automobiles, from limited-edition Ferraris to custom Bentleys, each one a testament to their owner's financial success. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the garage hummed with the quiet efficiency of wealth, valets in crisp uniforms carefully handling keys worth more than most people's homes, security cameras monitoring every angle, and an atmosphere of understated luxury that made it clear this wasn't a place for ordinary people. Marcus Thompson had arrived for what should have been a routine shopping trip. He'd promised his sister he'd pick up a gift for her graduation from medical school, and the rodeo collection seemed like the perfect place to find something special. The 26-year-old entrepreneur had founded his first tech company at 19, sold it for $50 million at 22, and had just completed the sale of his third startup, a revolutionary AI platform that had caught the attention of every major tech giant in Silicon Valley. The $2.8 billion acquisition had made him one of the youngest black billionaires in American history. But standing in this parking garage, none of that seemed to matter. The McLaren 720S was Marcus's one indulgence, a celebration of his latest success that he'd purchased just 3 weeks earlier. The Volcano Orange supercar was a masterpiece of engineering, capable of reaching 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds, and costing more than most people's houses. To Marcus, it represented not just success, but the freedom to enjoy the fruits of his labor without having to justify his presence in spaces where he'd once been unwelcome. But as he approached his car after lunch, key fob in hand, he found his path blocked by a man in a valet uniform who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from this vehicle," said Gerald Morrison, a 28-year-old valet who'd been working at the rodeo collection for 6 months. Gerald had seen plenty of expensive cars and their equally expensive owners, but something about this situation didn't sit right with him. The young man approaching the McLaren didn't fit his mental image of someone who could afford a $300. Too young, too casual in his jeans and Stanford hoodie, and definitely not the type of person Gerald expected to see climbing into one of the garage's most expensive vehicles. Marcus stopped, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, this car," Gerald continued, his voice gaining confidence as he convinced himself he was preventing a crime. "You can't just walk up to someone else's car like that. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the garage." "This is my car," Marcus replied calmly, holding up the McLaren key fob. The orange and black device was unmistakably authentic, but Gerald barely glanced at it. "Right," Gerald scoffed. "And I suppose you're going to tell me you bought a $300,000 car with your allowance money?" The comment stung more than Marcus cared to admit. He'd faced these assumptions his entire life, as a black teenager building apps in his Stanford dorm room, as a young entrepreneur pitching to venture capitalists who questioned whether he was really the founder of his own company, and now, as a billionaire who apparently didn't look wealthy enough to own an expensive car. "Look," Marcus said, maintaining his composure, "I understand this might seem unusual, but this really is my car. I can show you the registration, the insurance documents, whatever you need to see." Gerald crossed his arms. "Nice try, but I've seen this before. Kids trying to impress their friends by pretending to own cars they can't afford. The real owner is probably shopping upstairs right now, and when they come back and find someone messing with their car—" "I'm not messing with anything," Marcus interrupted, his patience beginning to wear thin. "I'm trying to get into my own car." The confrontation was beginning to draw attention. Other valets paused in their duties to watch the unfolding drama, while security cameras captured every angle of the interaction. A few shoppers on their way to and from their own vehicles slowed down to observe, some pulling out their phones to record what they sensed might become an interesting social media moment. Gerald, emboldened by the audience and convinced he was doing the right thing, decided to escalate. "You know what? I'm calling security. Let them sort this out." "That's fine," Marcus replied, though he could feel his frustration mounting. "Call whoever you need to call." As Gerald reached for his radio, Marcus pressed the unlock button on his key fob. The McLaren's lights flashed. Its distinctive butterfly doors began to open, and the engine management system activated with a soft electronic chime. For a moment, the garage fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the supercar's systems coming online. Gerald stared at the responding vehicle, his confidence wavering for the first time. But rather than admit his mistake, he doubled down. "Okay, so you have a key," he said. "That doesn't prove anything. Maybe you stole it, or maybe you're just holding it for the real owner." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you serious right now?" "Dead serious," Gerald replied. "I'm not letting you drive off in a stolen car on my watch." The absurdity of the situation was beginning to dawn on the gathering crowd. Here was a young man with the correct key, standing next to a car that responded to his commands, being accused of theft by a valet who seemed determined to ignore every piece of evidence in front of him. Marcus pulled out his phone. "You want proof? Fine. Let me show you something." He opened his mobile banking app, navigating to his account summary with practiced ease. The numbers on the screen were staggering. A checking account balance that exceeded the GDP of small countries, investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions, and recent transactions that included the purchase of the very car they were standing next to. "This is my bank account," Marcus said, turning the phone so Gerald could see. "And here's the transaction from 3 weeks ago when I bought this car." Gerald looked at the screen, his eyes widening as he processed the numbers. But even faced with overwhelming evidence, he struggled to reconcile what he was seeing with his preconceived notions. That could be photoshopped," he stammered. "Anyone can fake a bank account screenshot." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "You think I photoshopped my bank account to steal a car I could buy 100 times over?" By now the confrontation had attracted the attention of James Peterson, the Rodeo Collection's head of security. Peterson was a 30-year veteran of private security, a man who'd seen every type of situation imaginable in his years protecting high-end establishments. As he approached the scene, he could see the tension in both men's postures and knew he needed to defuse the situation quickly. "What seems to be the problem here?" Peterson asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Gerald immediately launched into his explanation. "This guy is trying to steal this McLaren. He claims it's his car, but there's no way someone his age could afford something like that. I think he's either stolen the key or he's working with the real owner to scam us somehow." Peterson looked at Marcus, taking in his casual clothing and youthful appearance. But unlike Gerald, Peterson's years of experience had taught him not to judge people solely by their appearance. He'd seen tech executives worth hundreds of millions who dressed like college students, and he'd learned that in places like Beverly Hills, wealth didn't always announce itself with expensive suits and ostentatious jewelry. "Sir," Peterson addressed Marcus, "do you have any documentation that proves ownership of this vehicle?" Marcus nodded, grateful for a more reasonable approach. He pulled out his wallet and extracted the vehicle registration, which clearly showed his name as the owner. He also produced his driver's license to confirm his identity. Peterson examined the documents carefully. Everything appeared to be in order. The registration was legitimate, the names matched, and the vehicle identification number corresponded to the McLaren they were standing next to. "Mr. Thompson," Peterson said, reading the name from the registration, "I apologize for this confusion. Everything appears to be in order." Gerald's face flushed red as the reality of his mistake began to sink in. But he's so young. How could he afford— "That's not really our concern," Peterson interrupted firmly. "Mr. Thompson has provided proof of ownership. The vehicle responds to his key, and there's no indication of any wrongdoing here." Marcus appreciated Peterson's professionalism, but the damage was already done. Word of the confrontation was spreading through social media as witnesses shared videos and photos of the incident. The hashtag McLaren, while black, was already beginning to trend, with users sharing their own stories of being questioned about their right to own expensive possessions. As Gerald reluctantly stepped aside, Marcus climbed into his car. But before driving away, he did something that surprised everyone watching. He lowered his window and called Gerald over. "Listen," Marcus said, his anger having cooled into something closer to disappointment. "I understand that you thought you were doing your job, but you need to understand what just happened here. You saw a young black man next to an expensive car and immediately assumed I didn't belong. You ignored the evidence, dismissed my explanations, and even when presented with proof, you kept looking for ways to justify your initial assumption." Gerald shuffled uncomfortably, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. I wasn't trying to be racist or anything. I know what you thought," Marcus interrupted gently. "And that's exactly the problem. You thought that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly afford something like this. But here's what you didn't know. I'm 26 years old. I founded 3 successful companies, and I just sold my latest startup for $2.8 billion. I could buy every car in this garage and not even notice the expense." The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation was now listening intently to Marcus's words. Several people were still recording, capturing a teachable moment that would be shared thousands of times across social media platforms. "But this isn't really about the money," Marcus continued. "It's about the assumptions we make about people based on how they look. It's about the fact that success, achievement, and wealth are still seen as surprising when they come in a package that doesn't fit certain expectations." James Peterson stepped forward, recognizing an opportunity to turn an embarrassing incident into a learning experience. "Mr. Thompson, I want to personally apologize for what happened here today. This is not the level of service we strive to provide, and it's certainly not reflective of our values as an organization." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "I hope this can be a learning opportunity for everyone, not just for Gerald here, but for anyone who watched this happen." Peterson assured Marcus that the incident would be thoroughly reviewed and that additional training would be provided to all staff members. He also offered to have Gerald formally apologize, but Marcus declined. "I don't need an apology," Marcus said. "I need change. I need people to understand that this kind of profiling happens every day to successful people of color, and it needs to stop." As Marcus drove away from the rodeo collection, he reflected on the incident and its broader implications. Despite his success, despite his wealth, despite all the barriers he'd broken through in the tech world, he was still subject to the same assumptions and prejudices that had followed him his entire life. The video of the confrontation went viral within hours, sparking conversations about racial profiling, unconscious bias, and the persistent stereotypes that successful people of color face in their daily lives. Major news outlets picked up the story, interviewing Marcus about his experience and using it as a jumping-off point for broader discussions about race and wealth in America. Gerald Morrison found himself at the center of an unwanted media storm. The rodeo collection, after conducting a thorough review of the incident, decided to terminate his employment and implement comprehensive bias training for all staff members. The shopping center also issued a public apology and announced new policies designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. For Marcus, the incident became a catalyst for a broader conversation about representation and assumptions in high-end retail environments. He used his platform and resources to launch an initiative aimed at educating luxury retailers about unconscious bias and the importance of treating all customers with equal respect and dignity. The McLaren, meanwhile, became something of a symbol. Marcus continued to drive it, not just because he enjoyed the engineering marvel it represented, but because he refused to let other people's prejudices dictate how he lived his life. Every time he pulled into a parking garage or stopped at a valet stand, he was reminded of that day at the rodeo collection and the work that still needed to be done. Months later, Marcus would look back on the incident as a turning point, not just in his personal understanding of how his success was perceived by others, but in his commitment to using his wealth and influence to address systemic inequalities. The confrontation that had started as an embarrassing case of mistaken identity had evolved into something much more significant, a reminder that breaking barriers in business was only the beginning of the work that needed to be done. The parking garage at the rodeo collection still houses some of the world's most expensive cars, and its staff still caters to an ultra-wealthy clientele. But now there's additional training, increased awareness, and a recognition that assumptions about who belongs in spaces of wealth and privilege can be not just wrong, but harmful. And somewhere in Silicon Valley, a young tech billionaire continues to drive his Volcano Orange McLaren, carrying with him the knowledge that success doesn't shield anyone from prejudice, but it can provide a platform to demand better from the world around us. 5 years later, the Marcus Thompson Foundation, the incident at the rodeo collection, had planted a seed that would grow into something far larger than Marcus could have imagined. 5 years after that confrontational afternoon, the Marcus Thompson Foundation had become one of the most influential organizations addressing bias in luxury retail and high-end service industries across America. The foundation's flagship program, Beyond Assumptions, had trained over 50,000 retail employees at luxury establishments from Beverly Hills to Manhattan. The curriculum, developed in partnership with Harvard Business School and UCLA's Anderson School of Management, focused on unconscious bias recognition, inclusive customer service, and the economic impact of discrimination on businesses. Marcus often reflected on how that single moment of confrontation had reshaped not just his own perspective, but had ripple effects throughout entire industries. The rodeo collection, once the site of his humiliation, had become the foundation's primary case study for successful bias intervention. Under new management and with comprehensive staff training, the shopping center had seen a 37% increase in diverse clientele and a corresponding boost in revenue. Gerald Morrison, the valet whose assumptions had started it all, had undergone his own transformation. After losing his job and facing public scrutiny, he'd reached out to Marcus personally, asking for a chance to make amends. That conversation led to Gerald becoming one of the foundation's most effective trainers, sharing his story with thousands of employees and helping them recognize their own potential blind spots. "I was that guy," Gerald would tell audiences during training sessions. "I saw a young black man next to an expensive car and immediately assumed he didn't belong. I ignored evidence, dismissed explanations, and nearly created a legal nightmare for my employer because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. Don't be me." The McLaren 720S, meanwhile, had become something of a legend in automotive and social justice circles. Marcus had been approached by numerous collectors offering millions for the car, not because of its mechanical specifications, but because of its cultural significance. He'd turned down every offer, continuing to drive it as a daily reminder of how far society had come and how far it still needed to go. The car had been featured in a documentary about wealth, race, and assumptions in modern America. The film, titled The Key Holders, had won several awards and sparked conversations in corporate boardrooms across the country about the hidden costs of discrimination. Marcus's tech empire had continued to expand. His fourth company, focused on AI-driven bias detection in hiring practices, had been acquired by Microsoft for $4.2 billion, making him one of the youngest people ever to sell multiple companies for billion-dollar figures. But increasingly, his focus had shifted from building wealth to addressing the systemic issues that his own success had highlighted. The foundation's research had uncovered troubling statistics about the treatment of young, successful people of color in luxury environments. Their studies showed that Black and Hispanic customers under 30 were 340% more likely to be questioned about their ability to afford high-end purchases, 290% more likely to be followed by security, and 450% more likely to have their payment methods scrutinized compared to their white counterparts. These findings had led to partnerships with major luxury brands, credit card companies, and high-end retailers to implement new policies and training programs. The economic argument was compelling. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was bad for business, potentially costing retailers millions in lost sales and reputation damage. Marcus had also established the Young Entrepreneurs of Color Scholarship Program, providing full rides to business school for promising students who might otherwise lack the connections and resources to break into exclusive industry. The program had already produced dozens of successful graduates who were making their own marks in technology, finance, and entrepreneurship. The parking garage at the rodeo collection now featured a small plaque near where Marcus's confrontation had taken place. It read, in recognition that respect and dignity should be afforded to all customers regardless of age, race, or appearance. Excellence in service means seeing potential, not making assumptions. On quiet Sunday mornings, Marcus would sometimes drive his McLaren through the empty streets of Beverly Hills, remembering that Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The car still drew stares, but now they were looks of recognition rather than suspicion. The story had become part of popular culture, referenced in business schools, diversity training programs, and even comedy sketches that highlighted the absurdity of judging people by their appearance. The Foundation's latest initiative focused on the next generation, partnering with high schools in underserved communities to provide entrepreneurship training and mentorship. Marcus believed that changing assumptions about who could be successful required actually increasing the number of young people of color achieving that success. The best way to fight stereotypes, he often said in interviews, is to make them statistically impossible to maintain. As Marcus pulled into his private garage that evening, the McLaren's doors rising like mechanical wings, he couldn't help but smile at the journey that had brought him here. What had started as a humiliating confrontation over a parking space had evolved into a movement that was changing how entire industries thought about their customers. The young man who had once been accused of stealing his own car had become a voice for change, using his platform and resources to ensure that others wouldn't face the same assumptions and barriers. And in a culture increasingly focused on appearance and first impressions, that work had never been more important. The Volcano Orange McLaren sat silent in its bay, a $300,000 reminder that success could take many forms, arrive at any age, and challenge every assumption about who deserved to hold the keys to the American dream.